Please stand. My brothers and sisters, our good news is taken from that has been recorded for us by Matthew. Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore, do and observe all things, whatever they tell you, but do not follow their example. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to carry and lay them on people's shoulders, but they would not lift a finger to remove them. All their works are performed simply to be seen. They widen their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love places of honors at banquets, seats of honors in synagogues, greetings in marketplaces, and the salutation, Rabbi. As for you, do not be called Rabbi. You have but one teacher. You are all simply brothers and sisters. Call no one on earth your father. You have but one Father, and that Father is in heaven. Do not be called master, for you have but one master, the Christ. The greatest among you must be the servant. Whoever exalts themselves will be humbled, but whoever humbles themselves will be exalted." The gospel of Christ. Praise be to Christ. Please be seated. So just two quick points before we get into the scriptures. One, if you did not hear any of the sound problems that we were having, I would suggest you go see your doctor this week, okay? That's first. I'm just saying, we're all very health conscious here. It's all about hearing, right, exactly. And the second thing, and I feel so bad as she's walking out, there is nothing worse than losing the ability to sing or preach. I was in a church, huge church, 2,000 people, and I'm walking up and down the center aisle, and I lose my voice. I'm coughing. I don't know where it came from. I was perfectly fine. This woman who is nursing a baby hands me the baby bottle, okay? As if to say, take some of this. But it still had the top on. And I'm standing there going, isn't this so nice? Somebody please save me from this moment. And one of the altar servers came down with a bottle of water. I don't know what happens. It's just really weird. It's also very embarrassing. And I'm sure right now she's out in the parking lot crying. It's okay. So my wife and I, we've started binge watching now, The Good Doctor. Okay. We're late, all right? We're behind the times. I know it's like 5 years old already, but we started watching, and now we're stuck in this whole thing where we're watching The Good Doctor. It's about this Dr. Murphy who has autism, who's really quite brilliant, lacks some social graces and skills, but really is brilliant, and it's a great hospital-type story. The one thing that I've recognized in 2 seasons so far, and we have 5 or 6 more to go. I'll let you know how it goes as over the next couple of months. But the one thing I've noticed is that a lot of the episodes have a lot to do with the human heart. A lot of them do, over and over again. And as you're watching this, whether it is someone who's coming into the emergency room or the ones I really like are the operations. I find that kind of cool, right, to see. It always has everything to do with the heart. And it really makes you reflect upon the fact that, the human heart is central to everything else that we are. And without the human heart, honestly, you could survive without a lot of things. Human heart is clearly not one of those. And it is precious and it is fundamental to who we are as human beings. Well, for centuries and generations, we always considered, and before we knew better psychologically or whatever the case might be, but we always considered the human heart to be the seat of where sentiment came from, where reasoning sort of came from, where feeling came from. Really, honestly, it was always the place where motivation came from. Your motives were based on how you were feeling, and those feelings and emotions came from the human heart, is what we always understood. We still say it, don't we? Follow your heart, right? We use terminology like that all the time. But really, the point of the matter is motives and why you are doing something is as intrinsic to us as human beings as the heart needs to beat. So every single day we move through activities and actions, and we're constantly choosing one thing to do or another based on what is the motivation. What is it that is inspiring us to do these things? What is the purpose behind our actions? Whether or not we're conscious of it or not, it is something that is fundamental to who we are as human beings. And so what Jesus is sort of crying out here and laying out the scribes and the Pharisees, and you have to understand a couple of things here about this. Jesus is being called rabbi, but he's not a rabbi. He's never trained in any of the schools. He doesn't have any of the degrees. He doesn't have a theology degree, hasn't been trained by any specific school of thought within, the Hebrew culture and within their religious constructs. He has no clarification or diploma indicating that he can do what he's doing. He's also never been ordained. So now all of a sudden he's getting up and he's talking, and the large crowds are coming to see him. And you could imagine how that would be really probably annoying to the scribes and Pharisees. So there is this tension that is constantly arising. Notice he does not disrespect them. Back in Jesus' day, the way and the purpose of a rabbi was to memorize the scriptures. From when they were very small boys, they were trained to memorize the scriptures. Why? Because their synagogues and churches did not have the Torah, did not have a book. Paper was very expensive. So only the synagogues that could afford it actually had a Torah, Torah being the first 5 books of the Bible. If they had any of the prophets, they were generally much more wealthy. So, for instance, just so you know, in the Gospels, we hear that Jesus goes into the synagogue in Nazareth, right, where he was born and raised, and they gave him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah to read from. What that basically tells us is that Nazareth is a pretty wealthy town. It tells us that that synagogue could afford, probably already has the 5 books of the Bible, but also has Isaiah. The point of the matter in all this is that rabbis really were needed and necessary because the vast majority of places of worship did not have anything to read from. So the rabbi would get up and literally, from memory, be able to cite most of the 5 books of the Torah. And so when Jesus is saying here, listen to what they tell you, he's basically telling them, yes, as an audience, listen to what their words are, because they are pronouncing and speaking and bringing to you the words of the first 5 books of the Bible, which we and they call the Torah. But then he goes on to say, but don't follow anything that they themselves are doing, because they're not being authentic. Now, mind you, there's a problem here, because scribes and Pharisees would be the absolute first people that if you asked anyone in the audience listening to Jesus, these are the men who gathered for prayer, 3-5 times a day. They spent their time in the temple. They spent their time, taking care of the widows, which was very fundamental at the time. And they were also caring for people in and through the process of a day, counseling and consultation and information around what is the law related to a situation that a family might be having. Now, if you think about it, a lot of Christians would say, well, I pray every day. I'm reading scripture. I go to services. What is Jesus talking about? What Jesus is doing here is he's reading their hearts. Jesus is able to see that what they're doing isn't because of the right motivation or intention. It's simply what they have to do because it's part of their job to do. And so he's calling that out. He's calling that out, and I guess in some odd way, Jesus recognizes that their motives aren't true, and it's not about love of God and love of neighbor, it has to do with the love of the position that they have as being a scribe or a Pharisee. And so he goes on to make a joke about the fact that they widen their phylacteries. Now, the times that I wear a robe and I wear a stole, the stole would be very similar to what they're considering a phylactery. So it's something that will go over your neck and come down. And so Jesus is poking fun at the fact that if it's wider and more ornate, you're more decorated than if it's thinner and you can't see it as much, So he's pointing this out to them, sort of calling them out. Now, mind you, the scribes and the Pharisees are in earshot of all of this. And then he goes on to say, about how they love the title of rabbi. Something I just learned yesterday, which I want to share with you. I did not know this until I was looking up the Hebrew word rabbi. Remember at Jesus' resurrection, Martha is, Mary Magdalene rather, is the one who's outside the tomb. And when she is called Mary by who she thinks is the gardener, she turns around and she goes, Rabboni. I just found out yesterday that rabbi is for a regular rabbi. Rabboni is actually related to a great teacher. So in the Gospels, the only place you will find that word Rabboni used is out of Mary's mouth at the point of the resurrection. And I just found that really intriguing. Up until then, Jesus is called rabbi. He's called rabbi over and over and over again. But at that point is the change. And I really just never picked it up. I never put that there was an emphasis on Rabboni over rabbi. Anyway, the point being that Jesus here is sort of calling out to all of us to ask ourselves, what are our motivations? Why do we do what we do? And that is going to be more fundamental, mind you, is basically what he's saying, than actually performing or doing the act itself. And that's a little disturbing, because I think for most of us, we think that, because we do good things and that we can be seen doing good things, somehow we sort of feel satisfied. But Jesus is saying that if you're doing good things, but you don't have the right intentions, then it contradicts itself. And so as much as the heart is fundamental to our humanity, God bless you, our intentions of why we do what we do is also critically important to who and what we are as human beings. And I find that intriguing that Jesus is that amazingly insightful. And so everyone is sitting there just as we are, and we say to ourselves, well, wow, there is that much behind why we do something, our motivation of why we do something. What is in our heart as we do it is as important, if not more so, than the actual function of doing something, is really something very intriguing, I think, that we all have to take a look at. Because for most of us, especially with Thanksgiving coming up and all this, we'll talk about the fact that, we'll start trying to put food together for people who are in need. We'll try and do this and that and the other thing. But the fact of the matter is, if you, like me, are busy and you're trying to run around getting all this stuff done, and you're just throwing stuff together because this is something you feel like you have to do, but your motivation isn't really for love of neighbor, then there's no need to do it in the first place, is according to what Jesus would be laying out for us. What are our motivations and our intentions as we live in this world and as we interact both with God and also with one another? Because with God, we could be simply taking time to pray because I got to pray, I'm supposed to do that. Well, I don't know about you, but if I have a friend who comes over to see me and spends time with me just because he feels like he has to come over and spend time with me, that's really not much of it's not going to be the best visit in the world, because you're going to pick up on the fact that he really doesn't want to be there. He's there just because he or she has to be. Wouldn't it be the same way with us approaching God? If we're not approaching God with a real desire to spend time with God, then I think God would be saying, well, why are you wasting your time? Now, if we're doing it out of discipline to try and grow ourselves so that we feel more drawn to a relationship with God, that's a really good intention and motivation. But if we're doing it just because we have to do it, or if we come to a sacred place like this, either virtually or here in person, and we're doing this just because it's Sunday and I need to be going to service, I'm not really sure that's what God is looking for out of us, you know? I get this thing all the time from, people who watch from a distance. They feel as though, even though they're watching, they feel as though they are obligated, or still feel obligated to attend a service in their own town or state, or we have a lot of people from all over the world, really. And I say to them, if you're being called, if you feel called to go out and to celebrate in a place of worship, then celebrate in a place of worship. But if you're finding an experience of God here or in a walk in nature or whatever the case might be, then those are as authentic experiences of God, as just being in church, just because you have to come to church. I know all this is radical, but I think this is exactly what Jesus is talking about. It's about what are our attitudes toward God and toward one another. God bless you.